that you can all be comfortable, and hopefully we'll have a great discussion going. As many of you know, Ali Shavit is going to be giving a lecture this evening at 7 o'clock in Club Spartan on the 3rd floor of Case, where James Madison College is. So I hope that many of you can come hear his engaging lecture this evening, where he will really give a longer lecture, and of course still have time for questions. So this really is meant more for a discussion with faculty and students. Ali Shavit won't be lecturing, but answering our questions. So I'll give a very quick introduction, then I'll ask a question. Professor Ken Waltzer, who directed our Jewish Studies program for 10 years, and has been at MSU for 40 years, or a little more. We'll ask the next question, and our visiting Israeli scholar, Alon Tal, who's teaching here the last couple of months. Some of you heard him speak at James Madison College and gave a fantastic talk. I think it was last week, and he's giving another talk on Tu B'Shvat, February 3rd. He sent flyers around for Alon Tal's next talk. He'll be asking questions, and our Professor Mark Bernstein, who teaches Hebrew and Israeli literature and Israeli film, is coordinating our 10th MSU Israeli Film Festival this spring. We'll be asking the next question. We'll make it really quick, and then it's open to everyone to ask questions, and hopefully we can get into a really good discussion. So it's really my pleasure. Many of you know me. I'm Yael Aronoff, the director of the Jewish Studies program here at the Chair of Israel Studies, and I teach at James Madison College. And it's a real pleasure to have Ali Shavit with us. Many of us read his books. I know Alon Tal classes, all the students in this class read your book. And many of you I know in KI Synagogue last year read the book. So many of us have been following it and really had an engaging read and already had discussions about the book before he came, and have been reading reviews of it. So it's a real pleasure for us to have you, a columnist, editor of Haaretz newspaper, which some would say is the best Israeli newspaper, but maybe that's too subjective. But in any case, Ali Shavit was just this morning writing his op-ed, given recent events for Haaretz, and it's a real pleasure to have him here with us. And an honor. He's on a tour of 28 universities and is having kind of a very exhausting schedule, I think, getting each place at midnight or 2 a.m. and lecturing on, meeting with students all day, and then on to the next place. So it's a real honor for us to be one of the 28 universities, including Northwestern and Princeton, University of Michigan, which he's been at this week. So it's kind of a timely time as well for us to have Ali Shavit. As many of you know, it's Holocaust Remembrance at the UN. Ken Waltzer, many of you saw Kinderblock 66. Ken Waltzer is writing a book on the rescue of children at Buchenwald, and is in the film and helped produce the film. It's being shown today at the United Nations in remembrance of the Holocaust, and yesterday was the 70th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. And of course, in some respects, Ali Shavit in his book really gives prominence to the triumph in terms of Israel in saving millions of people and being the only kind of refuge for people that was in dire crisis. And so this is timely in that respect, and it's also timely in terms of the 7 circles of threat that Ali Shavit points in the book, in terms of that Israel faces when Israel is now in a tit-for-tat with Hezbollah as of this morning, and Ali Shavit is trying to prevent that from further escalation. So I think one of the really fascinating things about the book is the duality, other than it's very well written in terms of personal stories and everything else, is the duality between looking at both the triumphs and the amazing, almost miracles that Israel performed on one hand, but on the other hand, looking at the costs historically to the society, to Palestinians who were displaced as well as kind of hearkening or having almost kind of a prophetic warning in the book in terms of if we don't really watch out and create a vision and rethink things and move back in some ways to the beauty in many respects that Israel was in the 50s and 60s and so forth before the 67 war. It's almost a prophetic warning that if we don't take heed now, we face a lot of internal identity questions as well as external empathy questions, which we're talking about at Hillel with students during lunch. And I think Ali Shavit does a really wonderful job of showing those dualities and complexities that Israel is about. When, as many of you know, when we read about it in the news or we talk about it, there's often very kind of simplistic pro-Israel or anti-Israel kind of dialogue, and Ali Shavit really moves away from that in terms of the complexity that exists in every country. And as I was reading the book, and I won't say too much because I want to get to my question and your comments, it seemed, something that came through my mind was, could you have this very same title, perhaps, The Triumph and Tragedy of any country in the world? And certainly there are unique aspects to Israel, but could we have a Triumph and Tragedy of the United States, where we talk about the genocide against the Native Americans, slavery, continuing inequalities in our country and our difficulty to reach equality and continuing racism in the country and so forth on one hand, but on the other hand, being the most prosperous country. And so in some respects, every country has a story of triumphs and tragedy, and every single country on earth, it seems to me, has on one hand skeletons in their closet and things that they're ashamed of, and things that they're working on and trying to promote a better society and a more unified identity, but on the other hand, dealing with this complexity. And in a way, Israel lives on the edge where this is seen as an exaggerated way, as you say, but in another sense, by showing the complexity of the country, you're basically normalizing Israel as one would looking at the complexity of any country one would analyze or observe around the world. My question is this, because I want to keep it brief and have lots of discussion. Many of you know, a lot of my teaching and research is focused on the past attempts at peace negotiations and looking forward to lessons to be learned and so forth. And so what I was interested in, as I went through this riveting book, which was over 400 pages, you were quite pessimistic about the prospects for a peace agreement with the Palestinians. And on one hand, you were kind of warning kind of stereotypical leftists of being blind to the challenges of attempting at peace. On the other hand, kind of also warning people on the right in a simplistic way of ignoring some of the complexities of Israel on the other side. But it seems like in a very long book that you devoted relatively little time to, in a persuasive manner, showing, I guess, asking, the conclusion that one would have to be really pessimistic about there being a peace partner and about their peace agreement. So I wanted to ask you, more about that. What evidence you've heard? Yes, these past attempts have failed at reaching a peace agreement, but one could add that there's so many nuances and the timing of things that one wouldn't necessarily have to be completely pessimistic in terms of the next attempts at a peace agreement, or the fact that Abu Mazen would be a genuine peace partner despite the many obstacles. So on the other hand, though, I want kind of the causation for this deep pessimism that you seem to have that you don't really go as deeply into in the book. And alongside that, you seem to really be calling for Israel to have greater vision, to have greater leadership, to move the country in the right direction. But it's not done as specifically in terms of the Israeli-Palestinian front as to what exactly, specifically, the vision should be in helping the state along and getting to that vision. So if you don't have a deep belief in Abu Mazen perhaps being a peace partner, it seems like you're leaning towards unilateral withdrawal until there's a time in which you can, of the West Bank, or most of the West Bank, until you can find a time where you can reach a real peace agreement. But you seem to hint around that in your book, but not really kind of delve into it in a specific way. So I wanted you to share with us more of the reasoning for your pessimism in terms of even being able to reach a peace agreement. And then secondly, given that pessimism, what is your specific vision for the country in terms of resolving this conflict? Just a simple question, Avi. Okay.
I thought there was 7 there. So first of all, thank you so much for your really very warm words. Thank you all for being here. First of all, I want to apologize for not attending the previous lesson. I don't know if you were given the full explanation, but it was really, first of all, being here on this campus tour was problematic to begin with, because when this was planned, we did not know that we will have an elections in Israel. For a journalist to leave the country during an election campaign is not an easy matter. But I believe so much in the importance of having this conversation here regarding Israel, regarding the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, regarding the Middle East, regarding Jewish life, that I met my commitment, and at the great higher professional price, not to mention the personal family price, I am here during the tour during this challenging time. But then what happened, of course, overnight is, to say briefly, it's really the first time that the drama of Israel really caught up with me, like specifically in a concrete way during the tour. Because last night in Ann Arbor, after having a long and very inspiring day with amazing conversations with mainly the young people there, I sat, as I like to do, in the hotel bar and wrote my op-ed for this week. And then by the time I woke up in the morning, it was, of course, made redundant. I mean, it might be relevant next week, but it was not what was needed today. What was needed today is really, it was my professional duty and my civil duty to put use whatever influence I have, if I have, in order to contribute to preventing escalation. These hours are critical hours. I am talking of pessimism and optimism. I'm a bit more hopeful now. It's almost every hour is different. So those of you who have not heard the news, Israel attacked Hezbollah convoy 10 days ago in the Golan Heights. Hezbollah responded this morning in Israel by attacking Israeli armed forces at the border of Lebanon. 2 soldiers were killed, an officer and a soldier. And this is how wars begin. We already had definitely one terrible war in 2006 that began just like that, but some of the Gaza wars began with a similar scenario. So I thought it was my obligation, to replace my old 7-hour article with a plea to the government, to the Prime Minister and the Ministry of Defense, to try to contain the situation. Because I think if we will strike, following the Hezbollah strike this morning, we might be in an escalation process that would be very difficult to control. So I apologize for the price was not meeting my obligation to be, but I thought that there was justification for that, and it's part of the Israeli story that you talk about the drama and then the drama catches up. And that has to do with the pessimism you talk about. When my book came out a year ago, and when I was doing my first rounds in last spring, and so many people asked me if I'm not too pessimistic about the conflict. Actually, they were not asking, they were saying I was too much pessimistic about it. At the time I came back at the end of the summer, no one asked me that. Because what happened, that the tragedy I described, again, as if it came out of the pages of the book, and it happened, and we just have had another chapter of the tragedy during the summer. And I'm so concerned about what happened in 2014, and this has to do with what I just discussed. I'm afraid the traumatic 2014 did not end. I fear it might have been a watershed year. Because we had 7 years of calm, relative calm. We had no peace, but definitely between West Bank, Palestine, and Israel, it was as peaceful as it was for decades. No Israelis got killed, and almost no Palestinians, West Bank Palestinians got killed in the last 7 years. And I'm afraid that, like in the Bible, the 7 good, fat years have ended. My criticism, and I'll get that at the beginning of my answer to your question, I think we wasted them in an almost criminal way. And when I say we wasted them, my anger is first of all at my own government, but I'm pretty angry at some international players as well, and I'll be saying something about it. And there is a great danger that we are beginning what might be much more violent and much more dangerous years. So I'm afraid that what we saw this summer was not one incident, but actually the beginning of a new era. And here I'll combine it with what you were talking about. I think my issue, I'm just, anyone who doesn't know, I'm totally, my values are totally the values of the Israeli peace. I mean, in Israeli political terms, I would say I'm a left-wing Zionist or a center-left person. I want the two-state solution. I think there's no other way but this two-state solution. I'm willing to make any concession that is not suicidal. I'm willing to give up the West Bank. We already gave up Gaza. I'm willing to divide Jerusalem. I have no ideological inhibitions about paying a price for a real peace as long as it does not endanger the existence of my country, my nation. My issue with the Orthodox peacemakers is that I think that we should have been much more creative first of all, realistic and then creative a long time. I had began having doubts about the Orthodox peace approach very early in the 90s. While also, in a sense, talking of prophecy, I anticipated the second intifada. Because I realized that the Oslo process, that I totally supported, again, the ideals of it, the purpose, the wishes, but I thought it was flawed. We can get into what was the flaw. And I realized that it's going to end with violence, because there was a tension, it was a process that was based on let's pretend we achieved peace, and by pretending we achieved peace, peace will be achieved. But none of the core issues were solved, and I thought that the dynamics would lead to violence. I didn't know it would erupt exactly in 2000, but I saw it coming. But say at that time you needed, only weirdos like me thought that, okay? And my own paper at that time, they thought I was a really strange person. They were willing to publish my articles only because they thought they were nicely written. They thought I was like a crazy guy writing nice, using nice vocabulary. So, but since 2000, I think we should have all learned a lesson. In my mind, the critical experiment was in 2000, when we tried to achieve the final status peace agreement, and it ended up with terrible bloodshed, not only with a failure, but terrible bloodshed. And my claim is that there's no person on the face of the planet that is more qualified to bring about peace in the Middle East than Bill Clinton. He has the IQ, the EQ, the IQ, the commitment, the compassion. He had everything. And Ehud Barak doesn't have all of these, but Ehud Barak broke many Israeli taboos and went a long way. Perhaps not enough, but a long way. So the combination and Arafat was the only Palestinian, in my mind, who had he was the revolution. So if anyone could have made the ideological concessions on the Palestinian side, it was Arafat. So he had the perfect team. You had an Israeli who was willing to commit suicide, and he committed political suicide of it. You had Bill Clinton, who is the best peacemaker in the world. And you had Arafat, who was the one who could have done it. So if it didn't work then, perhaps it will work in the future, but there's doubt. And I think that since 2000, we should have been working on an alternative concept. But if we've not learned the lesson there, and some of the purist peaceniks said, Barak was not good enough, we have to, it wasn't perfect. So, thank God, came Ehud Olmert, the great Israeli Prime Minister, and took the ultimate peaceniks, the old peace team, and gave them the mission. So the experiment that failed once was given a second chance, and this time on the Israeli side, if Barak didn't have the EQ, he was not nice, he was not polite, he was not a nice guy. Ehud Olmert has all the charm, he has EQ, and he went as far as Israelis can go. And once again, it didn't work. This time, thank God, it didn't end in violence. I thought that by that time we should have come up with an alternative. That realizing that the two-state solution will be achieved in a different way, not in this old kind of way. And I think it's irresponsible not to develop this alternative concept. So I do have a concept. I don't want to bother you now with it. We can talk about it later. Perhaps I'll speak about it tonight. You can go, although the New Republic is no longer with us, but you can look for an article I published in the New Republic in May of 2014, and I'll connect the dots here, why I published it then, which has my alternative peace concept, which has unilateral elements in it, but in a kind of putting it in a political context, which unilateralism left. So I think we need, and now I did that to put my own like constructive idea on the table, but I'm not like religiously committed to my idea. I think that the need to think creatively about a different approach is so needed, especially after the events of the last year. And to end this long answer, why am I even more angry today at the lack of leadership? Because why am I so worried about the Middle East right now and about the conflict? Because 2014 began with a hope of peace. John Kerry, and I have a lot of admiration for his commitment and will and energy he put into it, and courage. He promised us the Israeli-Palestinian conflict will be over by March 29, 2014. I tried to warn the American peace team, in my writing and not in my writing, that it's irresponsible not to have an alternative concept. It's irresponsible not to have plan B in case plan A crashes. I told them, I don't believe you'll succeed, but even if you believe that you have a 70% chance in succeeding, if there is a 30% chance you'll fail, it's irresponsible not to have a contingency. Sadly, nothing was done. And when what I anticipated happened, and the process collapsed in March 17th was a critical day, the Obama-Abbas meeting in the White House. When it collapsed, there was no alternative plan, there was no plan B. The American team went back to Washington, ignoring the Middle East. My government had no vision, no positive Israeli idea, not an Israeli initiative. The Palestinians went into a negative dynamic. So the result was a vacuum. Now we know from our history there is nothing more dangerous in the Middle East than a vacuum. As futile as the peace process was, it was at least an organizing principle. It kept people talking and prevented violence. From March on, there was nothing to stabilize the region, stabilize the country. So within that vacuum, what happened? Two terrible terror incidents. One, the kidnapping and killing of the 3 Israeli boys, and then the terrible, terrible kidnapping and burning of the Palestinian boys. It's something that makes me shiver as a Jew, as an Israeli. But these 2 terror incidents that could have been contained had we had a process, had we had leadership, were not contained because we had no leadership. No Israeli leadership, no Palestinian leadership, and sadly no American leadership, no international leadership. There was a vacuum. So things spiraled out of control. And when the moderates don't work together, the extremists have the upper hand. There's so many extremists out there. So we found ourselves in a war that no one wanted. Abbas didn't want the war, Netanyahu didn't want the war, I think even Hamas didn't want it. But the dynamics were stronger than everybody. And the rockets of July resembled the guns of August. Not thank out on the same scale, but it's the dynamics that the train, you cannot stop the trains. And I think that after going through this traumatic summer, with all the trauma Israelis went through, and all the terrible killing and tragedy in Gaza, and the destruction, the carnage, the thousands of people dead, and so many people homeless. After that, that was the greatest wake-up call one can get. So after that, for all of the above, the Israelis, the Palestinians, the Americans, not to do anything after the summer, that's so irresponsible. I mean, the writing is on the wall. The writing is on the wall. So all people are doing, they are sticking to the old ideas. You know, the Israeli peaceniks are with the Orthodox peace. The Israeli right is becoming more and more right and loony. The Palestinians are playing, and we are angry now, we are not playing ball. We are just playing aggressive diplomacy. And America, I don't know, is there America? So this is why I'm afraid that if something won't happen, if we won't wake up and take action to bring a new kind of constructive peace concept, I see terrible things happening. Terrible things happening. And I can tell you now as a journalist that my discussions with leading Israeli officials, or not politicians, but are like professionals, I never heard these kind of very solid, cautious, professional people so worried in the last few months. So worried. Because the way it is now, we are going for another conflict in Gaza. We are going, there was supposed to be a plan for the rebuilding of Gaza. $5.2 billion were promised, $100 million got to Gaza. Nothing is done. Actually, Israel is being the more responsible player, actually helping the Palestinians in small ways, but not in a big way. By this time, we should have been building water plants in Gaza, power stations in Gaza, housing plants, projects in Gaza. There should have been a Marshall Plan for Gaza. We should be very tough with Hamas, but we should be taking care of the people of Gaza. We cannot ignore it. We are not doing that. At the same time, we are not giving any political hope in the West Bank. All the Israeli government did since the summer was to build more and more settlements and to bring about all kinds of crazy nationalistic laws. We didn't do anything that shows goodwill. And the Palestinians are now going for political warfare. What they are doing now is so dangerous. So the combination of political warfare between the Palestinians and the Israelis, the old vacuum there, the tension and despair growing in Gaza, and the basic situation of the Middle East that is chaotic, that has become like nitroglycerin. All this is so dangerous. It's like all the ingredients of a perfect storm. So I say let's wake up and bring about another concept and do something to try to stabilize a region that is so unstable and to try to give some hope to a country and to people that are now, right now, don't have any hope.
I want to ask a question about you as the author of My Promise. I'm struck in your current discussion how straightforward, how frank, how pointed, how undualistic your assessment is of the current situation. But as you wrote at the beginning of My Promised Land, you're going to view things through a duality. And Leo Moiseltier said about you that you could see the strengths and criticize things at one and the same time. In retrospect, now that you're a year or two beyond writing the book, did the duality by which you, the form of duality by which you approach the subject matter of My Promised Land lead to strengths in the book or to weaknesses in the book? What's your sense of the ways in which it worked to make the book powerful and complex, and the ways in which it may have worked to make the lauding of Israel matched by the lamentations of that?
Look, it's not for me to judge the book. That's for you and for others. I hope people who've not read it will read it, and each one will decide what's powerful, what's weak, what's right, what's wrong. I'll tell you why I wrote the book. Why is the book different than my op-eds or my statements on television or what I say? There's no contradiction, I think, but it's two different ways to approach the subject matter. In this sense, you're so right. Because I thought I wrote the book partly because I thought there's too much polemics about it. I didn't want to write another polemical book. As you just heard, I'm a very opinionated person. I know the solution to every Israeli problem. But the book was not about promoting my agenda. And so you have my insights, you have my thoughts, I'm there. But it was about trying to bring back the human story. Listening to humans, telling their life stories, and by that, trying in my own personal way. I'm not like, it's a personal book, it's a personal journey, it's a real journey I went through. That trying to bring back the biography of my people in a sense, kind of way. Again, through my own, in a limited way. I have no objective inspirations. So it's different, you know, I do two different kinds of writing. I mean, this is closer to, if you wish, fine writing, unlike, you know, combative political finding. The whole point here. Look, I, in my own life, being, you know, a journalist and before that a peace activist and a human rights activist, I'm so, you know, every week, every day, I'm in the battle there. I'm in the ring, you know, boxing. And Israel is so much like that. We're all the time boxing and shouting. And the whole exercise of the book was to do something different, to take a step back, in a sense, more like to be more pensive. So the book is really the inner. I hope you can hear like the emotions and thoughts of a person who's really going through a kind of soul-searching process and trying to understand his nation and the phenomena of so you know, let 1,000 flowers bloom. I think there is need for this. There is need for that, and thank God in my case, you know, I have the privilege of being able to do both. So I don't think there is a contradiction between two. I hope they actually create something whole altogether.
Hi. So on behalf of our class 391, we reckon that if you even contributed a little bit to containing the violence, then it was probably worth it. The worst that happened if they learned more about desalination and contamination of the coastal aquifer. And that'll be fun, but many of them are here and have come with questions, so perhaps they'll have a chance to make opportunity.
And just as I said before, I'm committed to give more time when anyone wants, because I do feel responsibility for the time lost.
So when this book came out, I was very impressed. For many years, I've had a sense that the relationship between Israel and the rest of the world has undergone a transformation. Certainly between the philanthropic and donor community that gave them money for many years with blank checks, it's changed, and in general. And I never know exactly how to articulate that new relationship. It's almost like the U.S. Supreme Court's definition of pornography. I don't know how to describe it, but I know it when I see it. So when I read this book, I said, this is a book which really picks us up into the new millennium. It takes us beyond some of the platitudes and simplistic relationships, and it's much more mature, and I really liked it and admired it. There's 17 chapters in this book, and 16 of them I think you got absolutely right. In other words, I think I wrote you an email that there's a chapter there about the Israeli left, and as somebody who finished the war in Lebanon and went right to Prime Minister Begin's house to start protesting, I felt like I was a few years ahead of me. Basically, he charted my own solution, or whatever. And it was almost like lying on a psychologist's couch and have somebody tell my story better than I could. However, there is a chapter that I found problematic, and it's always a danger, I think, when you write a book, as you should write a book as a journalist, based on your experience. But empirically, and in terms of my own impressions, I think one chapter is not consistent with my experience. And that is the chapter you wrote, I think it's called Up to the Galilee, about Israel's Arab community. And the chapter, for those who, all my students read it cover to cover, right? 400 pages worth. But the chapter largely is almost a trip that he takes with a young lawyer named Mohammed Dakhla, who I know litigated with him in some environmental cases, and his basically recording his complaint against the Israeli state. And at some point they stop and meet Azmi Bashara, who at the time was a parliamentarian, and their basic position as Israeli Arab citizens and their deep alienation from the state of Israel, anger, hostility, and whatever. And I found that this was a poor choice of example. That both Dakhla, who's extremely smart and talented as an attorney, but extreme in his views. And Avni Bashar, who subsequent to this trip was found to have been passing on information to Hezbollah, which you mentioned, and was he left unceremoniously or escaped the country before he would have been tried for treason, for putting people's lives in danger and doing that. And I don't think that represents the Israeli Arab community. And that's easy to say, but there are people who study this in an empirical way. Perhaps the leading sociologist, Sami Smucha of Haifa University, does this every year. He takes a survey of 700 Arab citizens and asks them, what do you think? And the numbers are clear that less than 20% of the Israeli Arabs, even in the worst times, deny Israel's right to be a Jewish state. 70% always would like to be part of Israel, do not want to join a Palestinian state or even a national state. So I thought that by giving such credence or such a platform to positions which I don't think represent a moderate Israeli position, people who are fundamentally, their loyalty to the state of Israel is in question, and they say it. I think that's unfair to Israeli Arabs who have been so very loyal, who are integrating, who are winning cooking contests on TV and becoming soccer stars and really leading our medical establishment, doing all kinds of wonderful things, astonishingly, as a minority. I think they didn't get the fair representation of the vote. Now, my question is this. One, how do you think that the Islamization in the Middle East is affecting Israeli Arabs? Are they afraid of it? But this extremism, has it changed the failure of the Arab Spring that's happening there? That's the first question. And the second one, it is an election, and you follow things closely. The recent decision by all Arab parties, I think there were 4 over the years that have splintered off to run as a single group. Do you think this will have potential to bring more Arab voters in? Yesterday's poll, I think, said only 11, about 10% of the Israeli Arabs are voting when they're 20% of the population, which is critical for those people who want to change the government to have a larger Arab representation in the
There are again, three things to be said. Because large parts of me are with you with the analysis of the Israeli Arabs. I actually don't disagree that much. But first of all, let's talk about the art of writing such a book. You have, and this is not a scientific book. That's that range. It's not an academic book. The whole trick here, or the secret, is to look for the individual case, the place, the person that gives the larger issue. And of course, you never. I mean, if I'll go into trying to take the polls and first of all, no one would read the book, and I'll get lost with trying to cover so much. I mean, this is a very ambitious book, trying to tell the story of over 100 years, in so many different aspects. We're dealing with different minorities, different tribes, different people, in 440 pages, and yet having it readable and hopefully something that people can relate to emotionally and intellectually. It's not easy.
No,
So
16 out of 17, more than a 9.
I'm willing to take the thing that at some places, the perfect, perhaps the choice is perhaps not. The reason I think that this is so there are several things you said. One, I do have several paragraphs at the end in my last chapter that deal with the Israeli Arabs that give some of the complexity you're talking about. So if you read the first, perhaps you remember strongly the data, but those and it's no chance. No coincidence, because I wanted to balance that, and therefore I have different few paragraphs there. But the issue, I think, is a deeper one, because I think we are both right. On the one hand, what you described is true, that there is the process of Israeli Arabs wanting to integrate into Israeli society. But, talking of the party that you just talked about, we are going to have now 11, 12 members of the Knesset. I don't think, definitely not more than 2. I think that almost perhaps it would be difficult to find one who fundamentally disagrees with Muhammad. Because there is a gap between the kind of voices that you hear among the people, especially middle-class Israeli Arabs who want to integrate, and the voices of the leadership, the political leadership and the intellectual leadership. So Muhammad is a very accurate description of the voices that you hear in the Knesset. And now I agree with you, talking about the vision part, what we should be doing. I actually had a wonderful meeting with a group of Israeli-Palestinian yuppies like a few months ago, which was very much about this. And even in the meeting, you felt the tension, because on the one hand, they want to integrate, and some of them are integrating, and actually there's good news, but they have a difficulty with the principle. They have a difference with the concept, with the ideological, with the Jewish state. They are torn in themselves. And this is a very open-minded. When you talk about the intelligentsia, when you talk about the political leadership, it doesn't represent that moderate voice. And at that meeting, I said to those yuppies, I said, what I want you to have is a really kind of, what I wish we will have with the Jewish population. I want a kind of liberal, middle-class party. In Israel in the 1950s had the liberal bourgeois party, first called General Zionists, and then the Liberal Party, and their slogan was "Tnu lichyot ba'aretz hazot," let us live in this land. And that was like a rebellion against the ideology and the socialist ethos and the Ben-Gurion demand all the time to save the nation and work hard and be pioneers. They wanted, let us live, let us live. And I think that the hope for integration of Israeli Arabs is when we'll have such a party that will be a kind, won't give up the nationalistic aspirations, but will say, sadly it doesn't happen. So perhaps you see it in the polls, and I can bring you a lot of anecdotal evidence of the good news and what you say. And I use the examples you talk about, what you refer to that I think is important to say is really a proof why Israel is not as racist as it is perceived by many. Because although we have racist elements and we have to condemn them and fight them in Israeli society, in Jewish Israeli society, these rabbis, they won't let you rent apartments to Arabs and all kinds of terrible, despicable things. I'm an optimist. I think these voices are in a minority, and the real news comes with these reality shows when Arabs have no problem being chosen as the best chefs or the best singers and so on. That's the indication of where the real people are. So I agree with you that there is this, I believe in the spontaneous forces in Israel. I'm a great believer in Israeli society. I think that Israel has horrible politics and a very impressive society. Impressive individuals, impressive society, terrible politicians, even worse than America. But right now, I think that what Mohammed is pretty much representative of the higher echelons of the Israeli-Palestinian society, because this moderate voice that I'm waiting for, and I'll do my best to bring about, is not there, as it is not conceptualized, and it's not institutionalized politically.
I don't want to take very much time because I want to let people have a chance to ask questions. I wanted to thank you for the book, and I think it's done a lot in terms of at least the American audience getting the debate going. And I think you were able to, refer to the duality of the book. I referred to it in class, and some of the students we were talking about in class this morning, sort of schizophrenic picture of the book, which I think somewhat mirrors, and this was a student mentioned, is that it mirrors somewhat Israeli society, that sort of polarity, polarization of society. I was wondering if you could speak maybe a little about the reception of the book in the United States amongst the Jewish community. In fact, or not just the Jewish community, but within the United States as a whole. The two selections I had students read in these computer class were the New Yorker, the Linda piece that appeared in the New Yorker, and then the short op-ed that appeared in the Wall Street Journal. And I thought it was interesting. I wanted to give them a contrast because the book overall, even though people have focused on the Linda chapter as being the black box chapter about Israel's dark past, the book as a whole is, as Ken mentioned, very laudatory of Israel and its accomplishments. It really focuses more on the green than the black box, the negative side. And that comes through, of course, much more in the Wall Street Journal, which helps. That was one question. The other thing, though, in that Wall Street Journal piece was the focus on Jordan. And my brother was actually a candidate for the Meretz party, would say there is a two-state solution. Tel Aviv and the rest of the country. And I wonder what you would have to say to that in terms of, yes, what you're describing Tel Aviv is wonderful, but that's not all of Israel.
course. Well, so again, let's take one at a time. So first of all, what happened with the New Yorker and the Wall Street Journal? You know, it's you know, I'm a journalist, so I'm used to it. But it kind of it makes you smile. You know, obviously each one takes the chapter that is meaningful for him, and you know that's life, and I cannot complain. I was privileged that both publications, you know, took chapters of my book at the same time. Doesn't happen often. I think that the question of the reception of the book generally in America is really interesting, and it goes much beyond these examples. And I think that in this sense, really, look, I'll say something personal, as it's just between us and the camera. Look, writing is a very long process, and especially writing a book like that, because you know I took a lot of risks. I kind of almost like invented a kind of genre in a sense. Some of the things I dealt with are very controversial, and yet I didn't want it to be a provocation. I mean, the whole thing was complicated, and you I sat there in my very small atelier kind of room in Tel Aviv, and writing it. And you know, at the end of the day, you ask yourself, you know, am I doing something meaningful, or am I crazy? You don't, you know. It's an interesting. What kept me was that I never thought the book would be that successful. It never occurred to me, but I really felt I had the need to write it for myself. So I was at peace. For me, I knew that I was doing the right thing for me, whatever, even if the world will reject it. But it's like a lonely thing, and you don't have time because you do the writing and then editing, and then oops, suddenly, you know, I always say, you know, it's the closest, you know, a male can come to giving birth. You know, suddenly there's a child out there. You know, you never prepared the nursery. You never thought what to do with his education. You know, what would you do? So the switch was shot, and when it all happened, I was wondering what the hell is going on. And with all due respect to myself and to the book, you know, I like my book, and some days I like myself, not many. But I really think that something happened here that is larger than the book and myself. And I think the issue is that really this terrible division that developed in this country, not only in this country, but in this country it's more striking, between the Israel can do no wrong attitude and Israel can do no wrong. So the people who love Israel and committed to Israel created a kind of overprotective approach that they didn't allow themselves to deal with the flaws and problems of Israel. And sometimes I say, no, especially the older generation, that the experience is Exodus, the film. And you know, Israel had to be as handsome as Paul Newman. If it's not as handsome as Paul Newman, it's not right. So anything that so if it's that was, and on the other hand, developed an entire new slate, especially that is so angry at Israel. And I'm not talking about the people who totally agree, but even definitely there are the ones who are really deeply hateful of Israel. But even among the people who are not hateful, people whose their way of relating to Israel is being obsessed with criticizing, which, by the way, is true to many Israeli left-wing Israelis. That's my criticism of the Israeli left. They say many things I agree with, but it forgot how to express the love and the admiration for it. So really, like, there was a kind of dichotomy. And I think that suddenly my book walked right into that and said, hey guys, and look, I had no agenda. I wrote the book for myself, but actually the message was, come on, you can love Israel while being critical of it. And you can love Israel while being realistic. And I say, I love Israel so much, and I'm so committed to it, that I have enough self-confidence. I think the story is so great. It's such an amazing and inspiring story that I'm not afraid of addressing the flaws and the problems and the sins. You know, I'm relaxed. And I think that some of the people who overprotective of Israel lack that confidence. But I think that because, although people on the right were critical and angry, much less so than expected. And so many people, one of the wonderful experiences that you meet so many people, not only, you know, when people time after time came and tell you, my book changed my life. When you hear it once, you can die. It's okay, you've done something in the world. But to hear it like 1,000 times, and it has to do with this, because suddenly I think that something here enabled people's, emotions to flow in a new way. There was nothing saying, it's okay. At the same time, it's so painful, and again, so many people describe it as a kind of emotional roller coaster. The struggle between hope and despair, between the triumph and the tragedy. It's a kind of, the duality is really deep. It's really kind of yin yang. I mean, it's all the time, light and dark, all the time wrestling, and you don't really know who wins. So I think that this is the interesting thing. And again, not that suddenly, and in this sense, I want to hope. Again, I'm not talking about myself or the book itself. I want to hope that we will see, or that perhaps we are seeing, the beginning of a new kind of conversation that I think is so needed, because I think it's needed for our intellectual integrity. I think we need it morally, but I also think I say we need it as someone who is so committed to Israel, because I think, and as there are so many young people here, and I just come from an amazing conversation with young people, and the main thing I do all the time is I listen to young people. And my greatest concern is that the older generation in this country did not listen to young people for a long time. The older generation did not give the younger people their space, enough respect to their values, and neglected young people. And if we want young people to relate to Israel, they cannot do it in the old way. They cannot do the podium. So you have to engage young people with Israel in a way that allows them to express their doubts, to have their questions, don't censor them, don't terrify them. I think that only by having a candid conversation, we can actually bring people back to appreciate what Israel has. And I do think Israel is so remarkable that I'm sure that at the end of a long, painful, candid conversation, we'll have much more love and support for Israel than we had in the beginning, rather than if we just sell a kind of cliche of what Israel is.
I think that's a good segue to open it up to questions, maybe first from some of our students, and maybe we'll take first some questions from students in Alan Tal's class who actually read the entire book, and I prepared some questions for this morning, so maybe we'll start with some of those students and then open it up to others. So we have students who've read the book, who have some questions first, and then we'll open it up to others. Don't be shy. Okay, great.
Courageous guy.
Yeah. Let's see. So I don't really know anything about Israel. This is the first book I've ever read, and I thought it was fascinating. I guess the narrative is something that drew me in, and I really enjoyed reading it. And one of the chapters I thought the sex, drugs, and Israeli initiative about young people, about that movement. At first I thought it was kind of out of place, and I wasn't expecting it. I'm still kind of confused on, because you were just talking about young people and this movement of drugs and rejecting Zionism and this Jewish identity almost that you said at the end of the chapter. Does that movement mean anything for Israel as a whole? What can you expect from those people? Stuff like that, I guess. If you could just talk a little bit more about that chapter.
Well, if Leader was the most painful chapter to write, this was the most fun chapter to write. So I
thought it was kind of gross, but anyway.
It was it was walking into a world that is not mine, age-wise and otherwise, but I think that it took me a while to win the confidence of people. Because in the beginning we were a bit advancing about what you know. Usually I'm perceived in Israel as the guy who interviews the prime minister. So suddenly, what am I doing? Interviewing or talking at length to half-naked guys and girls by the bar. So I'm not sure. I know that there are many people who saw this entire phenomenon as very decadent and horrible. And I'm ambivalent. First of all, I'm into party. I think people should party. And I think I think one of the successes of Zionism, and one of the reasons that we did not end up like the Soviet Union. On the one hand, we had revolutionary zeal, and we were very committed, and there were the kibbutzniks and the pioneers and the warriors, people who made sacrifice and so on. But throughout the years, this was a revolution with a twinkle in the eye. We loved life, and we had a lust for it, and we always danced. And there was Tel Aviv party did not begin in 2000. Tel Aviv was partying in the 1930s. So there was a nice kind of balance throughout our modern 100-year Zionist Israeli history of the great struggle, the commitment, the wars, the great deeds, and during the war of attrition, late 1960s, we were then fighting in the Suez Canal, and there was like criticism. People were fighting there, and in Tel Aviv it was exactly the time of the swinging 60s, and there were many discotheques and cafes and so on, and there was some criticism, but that was, smart people realized that, first of all, this is what you're fighting for. If you're just a Spartan entity, even a benign Spartan entity, it's dreary and it won't last. At the end of the day, even when you fight, you're fighting to protect a free society, and that's an expression and manifestation of that freedom. So to begin with, I thought that element was actually always there in us, and it's a good element. Specifically with this phenomenon, I described there, it has to do, what you have there, you also have with the Israeli Philharmonic Orchestra. The musicians who come to Israel, whether they are the DJs or the great maestros, they always talk about this unique warmth of the Israeli audience. There is something, and that's what part of the beauty and the triumph of Israel. The intensity of life, the fact that people are warm, are passionate. The fact that we are sensual and sexy is really part of our great success. I think that that's something to be proud of, not something to be. It's true that you don't want this to become extreme. You don't want people to be so. In that chapter, I think I tried, like in other things, to bring the balance. On the one hand, the beauty of liberation and going wild, and on the other hand, the fear that there is this element of running away from reality. That now, up to a point, this rebellion against the Zionist superego is understood and needed, because there's too much burden on us. So people, at a certain point, it's dangerous. It's dangerous because it becomes escapist, and it can become decadent or. So on the one hand, I appreciate. I don't think it's like growth. I think that, like other things, you should not overdo it. You shouldn't let that be a substitute for dealing with reality or having other values. And I'll tell you a story that I wanted to put in the book, and I'll tell you I didn't put in the book because I was afraid that it will sound like kitsch. It will read like kitsch. But it's a true story, and for me it's very important. One of the things I don't describe there is that I went into a party, an after party. For those of you who don't know, the after parties are usually like late night, early morning parties. In Uman Club in Jerusalem, which was